Welcome to the Middlesex Moments radio show. I'm Dr. Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College, and joining me today is Jacqueline Talbot, who's the Lower River Steward for the Connecticut River Watershed Council. So I looked up your organization online, and I realized that Connecticut River obviously goes outside of Connecticut, even though, how did Connecticut get the naming rights?
Yes.
Why isn't it the Massachusetts River?
Well, actually, there was a program on NPR featured all about the Connecticut River, and my executive director, Andrew Fisk, was on the program, as was Jerry Roberts from the Connecticut River Museum. We partner with the museum on a variety of recreational opportunities, and they're a wonderful organization, and he was explaining that people think that it's the Connecticut River because it's in the state of Connecticut, but it's actually the state of Connecticut was named after the Connecticut River because Connecticut, which is an Algonquin word, means something like long tidal river, and that Connecticut was named because the Connecticut River flows through it. And the Connecticut River starts at the base of Canada, and it runs 410 miles long, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, and Connecticut before dumping into Long Island Sound. And it provides 70% of the fresh water to Long Island Sound. So it's an amazing river. It flows through incredibly diverse communities, agricultural, suburban, urban, and we really try to think about how to make our programs inclusive to those communities, diverse communities.
What's the headwaters then? Is it a lake?
Fourth Lake.
Fourth Lake, like F-O-U-R-T-H.
Yes, and I've actually never, I really want to visit the headwaters. We've been discussing that within the organization because I haven't been up there yet, and I want to visit the Fourth Lake very badly. And I heard from people on the program that it begins with just a small trickle coming out of the mountains. Pretty amazing.
Yeah. I moved here from Minnesota, so I've been at the mouth of the Mississippi River, which, I never thought, well, why is it not the Minnesota River? Because it starts in Minnesota. But it's named for the state that it sort of terminates in, Louisiana, Mississippi. Yeah, but it's also, obviously, it's another Native American word. But the headwaters there are fantastic, and
I would love to visit Mississippi.
Yeah. It's a bunch of stuff. Yeah, it's remarkable that something that small and clean. We can talk about clean water as well. Something that small and clean becomes so incredibly muddy, the muddy Mississippi, and I'm sure you find that here in Connecticut as well.
Well, we have you can actually see a photograph online post Tropical Storm Irene of the tremendous sediment plume that the Connecticut River contributed to Long Island Sound post Irene, because all that sediment was churning up and the water took it downstream, and it's just, you can actually see it. It's pretty incredible. Rivers are incredible. I started off with a fascination with the ocean, and I still carry that, but having worked as the river steward now, this is my third year, I've come to really love rivers and have just tremendous respect for what they contribute to communities and to the ocean.
I want to find out more about that because my daughter is actually obviously from Minnesota as well, but she's right now in love with the oceans, which I don't understand how that happened. Coming from a state that has 14 or 15,000 lakes and is known for the 10,000 lakes, and suddenly she's into oceans and fisheries. But it happens, doesn't it?
It does.
Part of it is that it's underwater, and it's mysterious, and there's so much that goes on. And all we see are it's called a blueway, this Connecticut River, right?
On May 24th, we were designated as the first in a national system of blueway, so it's a great honor, and it's a great acknowledgement to the numerous individuals and groups who have been working to restore this river and bring it back. So it's going to mean good things, and it's an acknowledgement of good things which have already been accomplished. But I think with the oceans, there's a certain vastness and secrecy which is enchanting, but with rivers, there's a certain accessibility. You can actually step in a river, you can swim in a river, you can fish from a river, you can have a relationship on a daily basis with a river in your community, and that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I agree. We'll be right. Well, welcome back. This is Anna Wasesha from Middlesex Community College, and Jacqueline Talbot and I are talking about the Connecticut River and rivers in general, and how wonderful water is and how important water is to life. When I was reading your biography, or the biographical statement on the website, it said you're also interested in climate change. And climate change and water are obviously going to be interlinked inextricably as well. So what do you make of the droughts this summer? And what impact does that have, for example, on the waterways? Because, when the hurricane went through Louisiana last week, what I read was the course of the river reversed. And so because the river is so shallow now, barges have been running aground. And barge traffic, a huge part of commerce in this country for people who don't. Do barges go up and down the Connecticut River?
We are one of the only, we have had large ships on the river in the past, but we're one of the only major rivers which does not have a port city at its mouth, and that's because of the changing sandbar at the mouth of the river where it empties into Long Island Sound. So we're actually quite fortunate, from my perspective, that we have that unique feature that allows us to keep that stretch of the river relatively undeveloped. So in terms of climate change and the storms we've been seeing and the droughts that we've been seeing, without getting into the larger debate, which I know we can have, yes, I feel that we're seeing both nature's natural cycles as well as her quite extreme response to our activities, which we've been doing for thousands of years. I feel that it's important to remember that rivers are dynamic. Rivers change. Rivers need room to breathe. They will shift over time. And I feel like the river has a much more likely chance of being here in perpetuity than we do. So I feel that it's really important to remember that when we're speaking about global environmental change, we're inextricably linked with that, not only because I do believe that we actively contribute and exacerbate it, but also because it's human communities which are going to be most drastically affected by erratic storms and changes in our climate, changing in our growing seasons. So it's kind of a no-brainer to me that this is something that should really matter to us. So I have confidence that the river will be there, but I think what's important is then how we respond to the river. We have been getting involved in work in the Chickley River in the upper watershed. The response to Tropical Storm Irene there was pretty extreme, and we feel that was an example of what not to do.
So tell me more about that, because I don't know what the response was.
The river was dredged, and big yellow machines were allowed to go in, and thinking that they were doing the right thing, but the river was dredged and filled in, and if you could see pictures of it, it's a little horrifying that something like that could be done to a river. So we've been actively working on, why was that allowed to happen? How can we prevent that in the future, as well as highlighting some of the things that were done that were positive as after Tropical Storm Irene. So where we have properly sized culverts that are big enough to allow the water that will flow through them in the event of a heavy rainstorm to flow through, then those communities are not needing to repair their roads because they had adequately sized culverts. So it's more of an investment up front, but it pays off for the town and for the community afterward, because I believe that the erratic weather that we are seeing will continue. It's been pretty unpredictable the last couple of years, and I feel that our response to rivers, to these weather events is really important, and it's indicative of the kind of communities that we want to create.
Right, exactly. So what would you say about the Connecticut River within Connecticut? Like, what is its contribution to the health, the natural health of Connecticut?
Well, so remember that Connecticut is the kind of last stop shop before entering Long Island Sound. So everything that has happened in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts affects us here in Connecticut, and then we contribute, again, 70% of the fresh water to Long Island Sound. So
which makes it an estuary, right? I mean,
we have estuaries in the lower
right.
Connecticut River. They're very rich with amazing biodiversity, and just the towns, they have this special character and feeling. It's just beautiful. The lower river is one of my favorite spots on the Connecticut River. It's certainly not the most important. Everybody would argue that their spot is the most important. The river is beautiful because of its diversity, but it's certainly an enchanting area.
Do people get drinking water out of the Connecticut River?
It's not used for drinking water at the moment. It's a Class B river in Connecticut. It's a Class B river, which means it's meant to be fishable and swimmable. And so that is the designation the state gives, and that is the goal for the river. It is not fishable and swimmable in all locations at all times. Largely, where it is impaired, in Connecticut at least, it is largely due to bacteria contamination from sewage overflows because of inadequate infrastructure, excessive amounts of stormwater, and we have a role in how we manage our stormwater and how we support needed infrastructure upgrades to correct that issue, which is a major public health and water quality issue, and something that we're going to continue to be engaged with in the future.
How did it become a blueway, a designated blueway?
It was designated by Department of the Interior Secretary Ken Salazar, and my understanding of the designation was that it was an acknowledgement of the incredible work that numerous groups all along the four-state watershed have done to restore this river. There was an article written by Joe Marfuji of Riverfront Recapture as to why it was here and not somewhere else, and that's a really great read. I would suggest your listeners to take a look at that. It was written recently.
So in the history of New England, there must have been several hundred years where industrial waste was just, and sewage, probably raw sewage, just put into that river. So, and how many decades have people been thinking we need to reverse that trend and we need to actually be stewards of the river?
Well, I certainly wouldn't say that the Watershed Council was, the first entity to consider the river. I mean, people have had a relationship with the river for a very long time, and I'm sure that there have been very many thoughtful individuals who have cared about its health. But we started in 1952, so we've just had our 60th anniversary being a watchdog for the entire watershed. And in 1953, we helped to start the Farmington River Watershed Association, so they've been at it for almost just as long as we have. And with the advent of the Clean Water Act, we've seen tremendous cooperation from the federal, state government, and local groups such as the Connecticut River Watershed Council to bring this river back. We see the eagles have returned, and we see people returning too, and we have narratives all the time. I receive narratives. I'm happy to be able to listen to people's narratives all the time of people who have lived here for decades and say the river is so much cleaner than it used to be. So we're really proud of that, but we have more work to do, and we're in it for the long haul.
Yeah, that's good to know. So what do you think happened in 1950, 51 that made people think that they needed to think differently about the rivers?
That's an interesting question, and something I think I'd have to give more thought to as to why then as opposed to 20 years before, 20 years later. I think I'd have to put it more in context and know the story a little bit more. I mean, I could wager a few guesses, but I don't know if they'd be very educated ones. They've kind of just been off the cuff.
Well, agricultural runoff is one of the big problems, at least in the Midwest. And that has to do, but it took a lot. I think it must have taken longer, although I certainly am not an expert on this. But I think the theory was that so many chemicals were developed as part of the war effort, and those companies wanted to continue to find markets for their products after they weren't needed for the war, so that the agricultural market was perfect for them, and they began to use them on farm fields. And then because we plow so much, there's so much just air filled with the particles of soil, there's so much erosion, and then that carries that into the rivers.
Non-point source pollution is a huge issue. I think that we do a fairly good job at regulating point source pollution to an extent. The Connecticut State DEP will issue permits for facilities discharging into the river, and the Connecticut River Watershed Council is one of the only groups constantly looking at those permits to look at just to have a second set of eyes on them and to see if they're stringent enough, if they're protective of our state water quality standards. And we'll also take a look at projects that are planned for the riverfront. We just took a look at the Glastonbury Riverfront Park Phase 2 of their Riverfront Park development. So Glastonbury is going to have access to the Connecticut River, which is going to be amazing, but we'll take a look at a project like that and just have a second set of eyes on it and say, is there anything that we can do to better manage stormwater here? Are there green infrastructure opportunities to be protective of water quality? And are we getting the most benefit for the lightest footprint?
Well, let's take another break. Well, we're back today with Jacqueline Talbot from the Connecticut River Watershed Council, and one of the reasons I wanted to have a half hour to talk with her was because I'm very intrigued by the river cleanup project that you're doing. And as I said, I actually, my entire life, I've always lived close to the Mississippi River. And the Minnesota State Fair, which is the very best state fair in the entire country, just concluded on Labor Day. And I didn't get to go this year. I've been every year for most of my life. But one of the coolest things they do a river cleanup, as you can imagine, I'm sure along the entire Mississippi River, is they take the things that they find, and some artist collaborative creates a sculpture for the state fair. I just saw a photograph of this year's, and it's insane what people put into rivers. So, and you've done this before. So, what have you found? What do people find when they clean up along the river?
It's insane what people put into rivers, but it's also amazing what artists can help create. I love the nexus of art and environmentalism. I really appreciate it. We've had in Middletown, we appreciate the river cubes that a number of local artists have helped place by the river. So what do we find in the river, the cleanups? What don't we find is kind of the question. Well, every year we ask volunteers to track the trash that they find, and then we compile all that trash so that we can put it into our cleanup chronicle and have a snapshot of what was found in the entire watershed. We find every year thousands of beverage containers. Those are probably our biggest offenders.
Plastic?
So mostly plastic, glass as well. We count those. So I think last year we found over 7,000 watershed-wide, and the year before that over 12,000 watershed-wide. We find mattresses, we find refrigerators, televisions, different appliances, people's clothing. We found personal items. We find numerous tires every year. We find, I don't want to shout out any company names, but we find beverage containers from a number of fast food volunteers to say, what's the most interesting item you've found and what's the most common item you've collected? And almost invariably, it's those beverage containers. Yeah. We have found a statue used in a religious ceremony. We have found, unfortunately, animal remains. We find a number of different things that all shouldn't be in the river ideally. So we extract from that the knowledge that we need to do more on prevention of pollution, that we need an army of people to help us steward the locations that they love, and we also find stories from the river.
Mm-hmm. We used to do neighborhood cleanups every year, and that began to take some of the pressure off the river. It is horrifying. People will just pull a car up next to the river and toss a dress of drawers out, because they don't. But when you start to have annual
you find
cleanups,
cars in the river too.
Right. That's tougher. I don't know if you can take that to a neighborhood cleanup, but it's that pressure to relieve the economic expense of waste. But waste is expensive. That's the other piece that we need to understand. It's reduce, reuse, recycle. So we have so much stuff that just is part of our daily life. The containers that food comes in, things like the packaging, products that we buy, and then that has to go somewhere, right? And
absolutely. There's no way, and that's a really good thing to remember, and something that's so easy for us to forget. So we would love for towns and companies to embrace policies which encourage people to do the right thing. So looking at the disposal fees is discouraging for people to do the right thing. But I feel like that's just one piece of a really complicated puzzle, because ideally people would do the right thing because they would have an intrinsic connection with the river. So I've been thinking a lot about it's wonderful to bring volunteers, and we really welcome everyone, but how do we cultivate an intrinsic sense of connection to our natural resources so people would see it as part of themselves, and they wouldn't dare offend it in the way that they wouldn't offend their home or their family. And we feel that we have numerous groups who return year after year to the cleanup, and we get reports from them that the volume of trash that they're finding is reduced. I'll give you an example that in northern Connecticut, in Enfield, we have an amazing group, the Scantic River Watershed Association out of Enfield, and they work with the Conservation Commission there. They've been doing the cleanup for about 11 years. I think one year they found 21 tons of trash. 21 tons. They find large appliances, they bring heavy lifting equipment. They're an amazing group. And then in recent years they found about 4 tons, which is still unheard of, and there shouldn't be that whatsoever, but we're finding evidence of reduced volumes year after year. But we're also thinking through how can we foster prevention of that in the first place. So where we have communities where we have significant dumping issues, we're trying to work with those communities, and that area in northern Connecticut is one of those areas. We're trying to see if we can do more there. We're also trying to speak more to state agencies and use our data for good purposes. So if you remember in the last legislative session, they were trying to pass mattress product stewardship legislation, and it didn't go through last minute. But if we have a dozen mattresses found, it's not going to carry the argument, but we'll try to provide that data for progressive initiatives like product stewardship legislation in all states of the watershed.
So, and that product stewardship legislation would mean that if I produce and sell a mattress, and so I sell it to a consumer, then I agree that a piece of the cost of my doing business is I will take that mattress back.
It means that there's responsibility. So it either means that product stewardship means that there's responsibility on the part of the manufacturer for the end of that item or the reuse of that item. So it either means a cost sharing, setting up a mechanism for recovering that cost, or setting up a process for the reuse of that item later on. I believe that we just opened the first mattress recycling business in Connecticut, and I met the owner. I think he came from Canada, so that's pretty exciting, and I hope that legislation will be able to go through next year, and something that we'll certainly look to support. In Massachusetts, they've been trying to have an expanded bottle bill for years now, so I've been in touch with them, and I'm definitely going to share our data on the types of beverage containers that we're finding and see if that can be helpful to them. We're looking to I know that Save the Sound has an amazing cleanup effort every year, and we're going to look to work with them and also with different state coordinators with the International Coastal Cleanup, see if we can coordinate our data, pool it for good purposes.
Sure. The aggregated data would be a much more powerful case.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so now you have this event scheduled for September 29th.
Yes.
And people who are listening to this program might want to help. They might want to have a up close and personal experience in the river.
Absolutely, and you are very welcome. The cleanup this year is Saturday, September 29th. We always tell people that if you can't be available that day, it's okay to clean in the days before or afterward, but if you participate on the 29th, you know that thousands of other people all along the watershed are doing the same thing as you are, and so that's pretty cool. We clean on the tributaries, we clean on the main stem groups. Anybody who wants to be involved, you can clean as an individual. You can join a group that already exists. You can start your own group. You can donate use of a truck or a boat, and there are various ways to support the cleanup. Even if you are not able to clean for whatever reason on that day, you're still able to report any trash tips that you have to us, and we will match those up with groups as we are able. And we also need people to inspire us on cleanup day, so we're looking for people just to go around and visit groups and take photos and say you're doing a great job. Also, if you're in a local band, we encourage local bands to go and cheer people on, and it gives you an opportunity to play. So there are many ways that you can be involved. If you're looking for information, you can check out our website, www.ctriver.org. There's a link to the Source to Sea cleanup there, and there will be different buttons on register, join a group, depending upon how you might want to be involved. If you have any questions, you're not finding what you need, you can give me a call at 860-704-0057 or email me at jtalbot, JTALBOT @ctriver.org, and I will help you out.
Perfect. So tell me what you do with 22,000 tons or 5,000 tons of stuff. Where does it go?
Well, individual groups have a great deal of autonomy because they're in all 4 states of the watershed, so we allow them the freedom to pick the time that they clean. They choose a site, they arrange for trash and recyclables pickup, and they track the trash that they find. If they're having trouble any step of the way, we help them out. We offer coordinating help and provide gloves and trash bags for cleanup groups. And generally, the municipalities all along the watershed have been really incredibly supportive of the cleanup. They will donate the service or a dumpster and help those groups out with taking that away. And we really encourage groups to do as much recycling as they can. We ask them to separate out scrap metal and recyclables to the extent that they're able to, and that the town will take it. But we really appreciate that support from municipalities.
Just to be clear, this is along what I guess would be called the beaches of the river. Are they in the river?
We have both. We ask people if they are planning to have walking or on-water cleanups, and every year we have some groups who just do walking and some groups who, they're walking along the banks of either the main stem or tributary.
Banks, not beaches. Okay.
And we do have canoes and kayaks and barges, a couple barges in the water every year. We even have offers of help from divers every year, which is great. So we will put people to use where we have them, where we have capacity, so long it's safe. There have been times where we've had to move a little bit inland or asked people to be really conscientious about water levels when being on the water. If we've had heavy rain, certainly after Tropical Storm Irene, everybody's plans got a little changed.
I would think so.
We just want to thank the watershed associations, the scout troops, the schools, the community members, municipalities, and businesses who help all along the Connecticut River and the tributaries to help us create a beautiful and safer watershed. In Middletown, here locally, we have the Connecticut River Coastal Conservation District, and they partner with a school group, an agricultural science group, every year to help clean in Middletown. And we also have received support from Smith & Bishop and Home Depot in Middletown, and we really appreciate that. So
Good for them.
Thank you.
Yeah, shout out to them. Well, I really appreciate your coming here today to talk about this, and I hope that lots of our listeners will call you and donate their time or their whatever their talents are.
Thank you.
The rivers need us. So this has been the Middlesex Moments radio show, and today I've been visiting with Jacqueline Talbot, who works with the Connecticut River Watershed Council. And don't forget, September 29th, you may see lots of people along the river because they're going to be cleaning it up, and you can have a role to play in that as well. If you're interested in learning more about Middlesex Community College, we're at mxcc.edu. I'm Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College, wishing you a good day.